In September 2024, a Swedish coastal mapping team conducting environmental surveys in the Stockholm Archipelago detected something impossible on their sonar imaging. 65 kilometers northeast of Stockholm, on a small uninhabited island among the 30,000 islands scattered across the Baltic Sea, structural patterns appeared that shouldn't exist: concrete foundations and underground chambers hidden beneath decades of forest growth. When archaeologists excavated the site, they found something that made the Swedish security service seal off the entire area within hours: a concrete bunker complex built into the island's bedrock, complete with living quarters, a radio communications center, and storage facilities, all perfectly camouflaged by 79 years of pine forest and Baltic vegetation. Inside the main command room, Gestapo operational files dated April 1945, surveillance equipment, encrypted communication logs, and a name etched into a metal desk plate: SS Sturmbannführer Heinz Krüger, Gestapo Hamburg Division. Krüger was a Gestapo intelligence officer who'd vanished from Hamburg in late April 1945. His death certificate, signed by British occupation authorities, listed him as killed during the final battle for the city. His name appeared on Allied war crimes lists. His family was told he'd been executed. The case was closed. But the archipelago base tells a different story. That mapping team had just discovered a fully operational intelligence facility built in the late 1940s, strategically positioned to monitor Soviet naval movements through the Baltic Sea, equipped with German surveillance technology, and designed for long-term covert operations. If you want to see what investigators uncovered about Krüger's real mission, and why Allied intelligence suspected Gestapo officers were operating secret surveillance posts in neutral Sweden for decades after the war, hit that like button. It helps us bring more forgotten World War II stories to light. And subscribe if you haven't already, because what we found in the base's sealed vault will reveal a network of former Gestapo agents who'd been watching Soviet military activity from Swedish territory for purposes no one fully understood. Now back to April 1945, when a Gestapo officer received orders that would take him to one of Europe's most isolated island networks. Character Introduction 130 to 230. SS Sturmbannführer Heinz Krüger was 38 when the war ended. A Gestapo intelligence officer since 1938, Krüger specialized in counterintelligence and surveillance operations, tracking resistance movements, monitoring foreign agents, analyzing intercepted communications. Unlike many Gestapo officers involved in deportations and executions, Krüger's role was purely intelligence gathering. His personnel file showed expertise in signals intelligence, cryptography, and surveillance technology. This technical background would prove crucial for his escape. Krüger had served in Hamburg since 1941, managing Gestapo surveillance operations across northern Germany. His work involved monitoring British intelligence activities, tracking escaped POWs, and coordinating with Abwehr naval intelligence on Allied shipping movements in the North Sea and Baltic. What made Krüger unique was his Scandinavian experience. From 1939 to 1940, he'd been assigned to the German embassy in Stockholm during the period when Germany maintained diplomatic relations with neutral Sweden. He spoke fluent Swedish, understood Swedish culture, and had cultivated contacts among Sweden's small pro-German community. By late 1944, Krüger understood Germany would lose, but he also recognized something most officers didn't: the coming conflict between the Western Allies and the Soviet Union. His intelligence experience told him surveillance of Soviet military movements would have enormous value in a post-war world. Between December 1944 and April 1945, Krüger systematically copied classified documents, secured surveillance equipment, and diverted Gestapo funds. He also re-established contact with Swedish associates from his embassy days, preparing an escape route into neutral territory. Historical context: 2:30 to 3 o'clock. April 1945. Hamburg was collapsing under British assault. The city had been devastated by firebombing in 1943. Now British ground forces approached from the west, while the city's remaining defenders, exhausted Wehrmacht units and desperate Volkssturm, prepared for inevitable surrender. For Gestapo officers, capture meant certain prosecution. The organization's role in Nazi terror made every member a war crimes suspect. Allied authorities had compiled extensive lists, Krüger's name appeared on British intelligence files for his counterintelligence work against Allied agents. Sweden's position was unique. Officially neutral throughout the war, Sweden had maintained relations with both sides while clearly favoring the Allies by 1945. But Sweden's vast archipelago, 30,000 islands stretching along the Baltic coast, remained largely unmonitored. Many islands were uninhabited, visited only by occasional fishermen. The Baltic Sea was strategically critical. Soviet naval forces operated from bases in Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. Any facility monitoring Baltic traffic would provide intelligence on Soviet military capabilities, information that would become extremely valuable as Cold War tensions developed. Krüger understood this. His mission wasn't military resistance, it was intelligence preservation for the coming East-West conflict. The escaped 3 o'clock to 4:15. April 28, 1945. British forces entered Hamburg's outskirts. Krüger activated his escape plan. April 30th. A body was discovered in burned-out Gestapo headquarters. The corpse wore Krüger's identification and SS uniform. British authorities processed it as SS Sturmbannführer Krüger, killed during final operations. Death certificate signed May 2nd. The body was a Gestapo clerk killed during British shelling, dressed in Krüger's uniform. Krüger had already left Hamburg using false papers identifying him as Hans Bergström, a Swedish journalist returning home. May 1945. Krüger traveled north through collapsing German lines to Denmark, then crossed into Sweden via fishing boat from Helsingør to Helsingborg, a common route for refugees and escapees. Swedish authorities, overwhelmed by refugees, checked papers minimally. Hans Bergström, with Swedish documents and fluent language, passed inspection easily. June 1945. Krüger reached Stockholm and contacted associates from his embassy years. The small pro-German Swedish community, while keeping low profiles after Germany's defeat, provided temporary housing and supplies. But Krüger wasn't staying in Stockholm. His destination was the archipelago, specifically a small uninhabited island 65 kilometers northeast, where he could establish a surveillance post invisible to Swedish authorities. July 1945. Using diverted Gestapo funds converted to Swedish kroner, Krüger hired Swedish workers through intermediaries. Cover story: building a private summer retreat for a wealthy businessman. Workers, paid well, asked no questions. August 1945. Construction began on what would become one of the Cold War's most secret facilities. Building the base 4:15 to 5:15. August-November 1945. Workers transported materials by boat, cement, steel, lumber, surveillance equipment, disguised as radio hobby gear. The island's isolation provided perfect cover. The base was built into the island's granite bedrock using Scandinavian construction techniques, excavating underground chambers, reinforcing with concrete, camouflaging entrances with natural rock formations and vegetation. The facility consisted of 4 main sections: living quarters, carved into bedrock with sleeping area, kitchen and storage, communications center with radio equipment, capable of intercepting Soviet naval transmissions, surveillance room with German optical equipment for visual monitoring of Baltic shipping lanes, and command center with maps, analysis equipment, and encrypted communication capability. December 1945. The base became operational. Krüger had created something unprecedented, a Gestapo surveillance facility operating in neutral territory, completely unknown to Swedish authorities, positioned perfectly to monitor Soviet military activity. His operational logs reveal the mission: strategic intelligence collection on Soviet Baltic fleet movements. Sweden's neutrality provides perfect cover. I am invisible, but operational. Krüger had built a Cold War listening post before the Cold War officially began. Life in the Archipelago 5:15 to 6:30. January 1946 und 40 to Krüger's log, base operational. Intercepting Soviet naval communications. Baltic fleet movements tracked daily. Krüger lived primarily on the island, making monthly Stockholm trips to Swedish contacts. Hans Bergström, reclusive businessman with archipelago property. The surveillance worked perfectly. From his position, Krüger monitored Soviet warships transiting between Baltic bases and open sea. His German optical equipment provided visual identification. Radio equipment intercepted Soviet communications. March 1948. 2 years operational. Documented 847 Soviet naval movements. Identified patrol patterns. Fleet compositions. Intelligence has value, but for whom? Krüger's dilemma. Valuable intelligence, but initially no customer. July 1950. Contact with Western intelligence. Meeting with K. in Stockholm. He represents American interests. Arrangements made for information transfer. I am no longer isolated. By 1950, the CIA actively recruited former German intelligence officers for anti-Soviet operations. Krüger's position made him useful. December 1955. 10 years at base. Tracking Soviet submarine movements, surface operations. Information provided to American contacts quarterly. Krüger transformed from fugitive war criminal to Cold War intelligence operative. March 1965. Final entry 20 years since escape. Base remains functional, but technology advances. Satellite surveillance will soon make ground observation obsolete. After March 1965, logs end. The base was sealed. The investigation 6:30 to 7:30. For 59 years the island base sat undiscovered. Among 30,000 archipelago islands, one more forested island attracted no attention. Swedish authorities suspected some Germans fled to Sweden. A 1946 investigation focused on cities but never searched the vast archipelago. In 1978, hikers found old concrete structures. Police assumed abandoned coastal defense. Closed the case. They'd been 50 meters from the entrance. September 2024. Sweden's Maritime Administration mapped coastline using advanced sonar. September 5th. Technician Eric Lindstrom detected structural anomalies, underground chambers, not natural. September 7th. Archaeologists investigated. Ground-penetrating radar confirmed extensive artificial structures. September 9th. Excavation began. Entrance exposed, concrete bunker camouflaged by decades of vegetation. September 11th. Entry breached, interior preserved, sealed construction prevented moisture. Command room. Gestapo files, surveillance logs, Soviet fleet documents. Communications center. German radio equipment. Surveillance room. Zeiss optical gear, still functional. September 13th. Vault opened. Inside operational logs 1906 und 40 minus 1905 und 60. Intelligence reports, metal desk plate, SS Sturmbannführer, Heinz Krüger, Gestapo Hamburg. International news within 24 hours. The revelation 8 o'clock to 10 o'clock. Swedish authorities assembled investigation team, historians, intelligence analysts, German archivists. The surveillance logs were extraordinary. Krüger had documented Soviet Baltic Fleet operations in meticulous detail, ship types, movement patterns, communication frequencies. Cross-referencing with declassified Cold War records confirmed the intelligence was accurate and valuable. Investigators discovered Krüger had indeed worked with American intelligence. CIA files released in 2015 mentioned Swedish-based source providing Baltic Fleet intelligence 1950 to 1965. The source was never named, now identified as Krüger. But what happened to Krüger himself? October 2006 researchers found death record in Stockholm. Hans Bergström, born 1907, Krüger's birth year, died August 1908 Krokskirkogården Cemetery. Occupation: maritime consultant. He'd worked for Swedish shipping companies 1966 to 1980, analyzing Baltic Sea traffic patterns, perfect cover using his surveillance expertise. Exhumation ordered, DNA compared with Krüger's descendants in Germany, his brother's grandchildren. November 2004 unzanzigste results. 9.4% Zeichenmatch. Hans Bergström was Heinz Krüger. He'd lived on the island until 1965, then moved to Stockholm, and worked legitimately in maritime consulting. He'd married a Swedish woman in 1968. He'd had 2 children, now in their 50s, living in Sweden. To colleagues and family, quiet German consultant with expertise in Baltic shipping, nobody suspected his past. He died age 75. Peacefully, never exposed, never prosecuted. The Swedish government declared the site protected for historical study. The facility represents Cold War intelligence operations and Sweden's complicated neutrality. Artifacts displayed at Swedish History Museum. Exhibition The Hidden Observer Cold War Intelligence in the Archipelago, opened January 2025. Krüger's daughter issued statement. We knew our father as Hans Bergstrom, maritime consultant. Learning he was Gestapo and operated a secret surveillance base is devastating. But apparently his intelligence work served Western interests during the Cold War. This raised uncomfortable questions. How many former Nazi officers received Western protection because their skills proved useful against the Soviets? Hans Krüger executed a perfect transformation. He faked his death, built a surveillance facility in neutral territory, operated it for 20 years while providing intelligence to American agencies, then lived 17 more years as a respected consultant in Stockholm. The base still stands. Swedish authorities are preserving it as a historical site documenting both Nazi escape routes and Cold War intelligence operations. A complicated legacy where war criminal became Cold War asset. Sometimes the guilty don't just escape justice, they make themselves too valuable to prosecute, then die peacefully decades later, their crimes forgiven in exchange for intelligence nobody else could provide.